In the dusty corners of Kensington Palace, beneath layers of royal protocol and carefully guarded secrets, a single envelope waited 27 years to be opened. Written in Diana's distinctive handwriting, sealed with tears and hope, this letter would reveal truths that the royal family never wanted the world to know. When Prince William finally broke the wax seal on his 41st birthday, the words inside would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy and explain why his mother's greatest fear was never the paparazzi, the press, or even her divorce from Prince Charles. Her greatest fear was that her sons would never truly know who she really was beneath the crown, the fairy tale, and the tragic ending that the world witnessed. This is the story of a mother's final gift to her son, a truth so powerful it would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the people's princess and change Prince William's understanding of his own destiny forever. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William walked through the corridors that had once echoed with his mother's laughter. It was June 21st, 2023, his 41st birthday, and what should have been a day of celebration felt heavy with memories and unfinished conversations. Catherine had left early with the children for their summer activities, giving him the solitude he had requested for this particular morning. William made his way to the small study that had been his mother's private sanctuary, a room that had remained largely untouched since her death in 1997. The palace staff had maintained it exactly as Diana had left it, down to the half-finished letter on her writing desk and the small vase of dried roses that she had placed there during her final days at the palace. As he sat in her chair, running his fingers over the smooth mahogany surface of the desk, William noticed something peculiar. There was a slight gap between two of the desk drawers that he had never seen before. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that one of the drawers had a false bottom, expertly crafted and nearly invisible to the casual observer. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully removed the thin wooden panel. Inside, wrapped in blue silk cloth, was an envelope bearing his name in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. The envelope was sealed with red wax, pressed with Diana's personal seal, a small swan, symbolizing grace and transformation. William held the letter for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. He had discovered other letters from his mother over the years, but something about this one felt different. The weight of it, the care with which it had been hidden, the formal seal, all of it suggested that this was not just another note, but something his mother had considered her most important message to him. The letter was dated August 30th, 1997, just one day before the tragic accident in Paris. Diana had written this knowing, perhaps sensing, that her time was running short. The realization hit William like a physical blow, and he found himself struggling to breathe as he contemplated the significance of what he held in his hands. In the margins of the envelope, in small, careful handwriting, Diana had written additional instructions, to be opened only when you are ready to understand the full truth about our family, about me, and about the path that lies ahead for you. With all my love, forever and always, Mummy. William's eyes filled with tears as he read these words. Even in her final days, his mother had been thinking about his future, about what he would need to know to navigate the complex world of royal duty and personal truth that lay ahead of him. She had always been protective of both him and Harry, shielding them from the darker aspects of royal life for as long as possible. The room seemed to hold its breath as William carefully broke the wax seal. The letter inside was several pages long, written on Diana's personal stationery, each page filled with her flowing script. But before he began reading, he noticed something else in the envelope, a small key, ornate and old, attached to a piece of paper with an address in London that he didn't recognize. As he unfolded the first page of the letter, William saw that his mother had organized her thoughts into specific sections, each dealing with different aspects of her life and his future. The opening lines made his heart race. "My dearest William, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. But please know that I am always in your heart, guiding you toward the truth that our family has kept hidden for far too long." The letter went on to explain that Diana had discovered information about the royal family's history, about secrets that had been buried for generations, and about decisions that had been made regarding William's future long before he was even born. She wrote about conversations she had overheard, documents she had found, and revelations that had changed her understanding of what it truly meant to be born into the House of Windsor. Diana revealed that she had spent the last months of her life gathering evidence of these secrets, not out of spite or revenge, but because she believed that William deserved to know the truth about his heritage and the real reasons behind many of the royal family's most closely guarded traditions. She had hidden this evidence in a safe deposit box in London, and the key William now held would unlock not just a box, but a completely different understanding of his family's history. One of the most shocking revelations in the opening pages was Diana's claim that the royal family had known about the problems in her marriage to Charles long before they became public, and that there had been conversations about the future of the monarchy that included contingency plans for what would happen if the marriage failed. These plans, according to Diana, included specific instructions about how William would be prepared for his future role as king, instructions that she had discovered and strongly disagreed with. The letter revealed that Diana had been systematically excluded from important decisions about her son's futures, particularly William's preparation for eventual kingship. She had learned that there were private tutors, advisors, and even psychological evaluations planned for William that she had never been consulted about. The royal establishment, according to Diana's account, had viewed her as a temporary figure in William's life, someone who would provide the necessary maternal influence during his early years but who would eventually be replaced by more suitable influences as he matured. This revelation explained many of the tensions that had existed between Diana and the royal family during the later years of her marriage. It wasn't just about Charles and Camilla or about the failed fairy tale romance. It was about a fundamental disagreement over William's future and the kind of king he should become. Diana wrote about her fears that William would be shaped into a traditional monarch, someone who would prioritize duty and institution over compassion and human connection. She had witnessed firsthand how the weight of royal responsibility had affected Charles, how it had made him distant and formal even with his own children. Diana was determined that William would have a different path, one that allowed him to maintain his humanity while still fulfilling his royal obligations. The letter also contained Diana's observations about the changing world and how the monarchy would need to evolve to remain relevant in the 21st century. She had written extensively about her belief that the royal family's future depended on their ability to connect with ordinary people, to show genuine empathy and understanding for the struggles of everyday life. Diana believed that William, with his natural compassion and his experiences growing up with a mother who had broken many royal protocols, was uniquely positioned to lead this transformation. As William read through these pages, he began to understand that his mother's letter was not just a personal message from a loving parent. It was a blueprint for a different kind of monarchy, a guide for how he could honor both his royal heritage and his human values. Diana had been preparing him for this moment even without his knowledge, through all the time she had taken him to homeless shelters, hospitals, and other places where he could see real suffering and learn to respond with genuine care. The letter also contained more personal revelations about Diana's own struggles during her final years. She wrote honestly about her battles with depression, her eating disorders, and her desperate attempts to find love and acceptance in a world that seemed determined to control every aspect of her life. But rather than dwelling on these struggles, Diana used them as examples of how important it was for William to maintain his emotional health and personal relationships as he navigated his own challenges. Diana's writing became particularly emotional when she addressed the topic of William's relationship with his father. She urged him not to let the pain of his parents' failed marriage poison his relationship with Charles, but she also warned him to be cautious about accepting everything he was told about royal duty and tradition. She encouraged him to ask questions, to seek out different perspectives, and to remember that being king did not mean sacrificing his own moral compass. The first part of the letter concluded with Diana's description of the additional evidence she had gathered, evidence that would be found in the London safe deposit box. She wrote that this evidence would show William exactly how decisions about the monarchy were really made, who wielded the real power behind the throne, and what forces he would need to navigate as he prepared for his eventual role as king. As William finished reading the first section of the letter, he realized that his understanding of his family, his mother, and his own future had been fundamentally altered. The woman who had died when he was just 15 had left him a roadmap for understanding not just the past, but the complex political and personal landscape he would need to navigate in the years ahead. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade as William carefully folded the first pages of the letter and reached for the mysterious key. He knew that the revelations contained in Diana's words were just the beginning, and that the evidence waiting in that London safe deposit box would likely challenge everything he had been taught about his family's history and his own destiny. Looking around his mother's study, seeing her photographs and personal belongings exactly as she had left them, William felt a profound sense of connection to Diana that he hadn't experienced since her death. It was as if she were there with him, guiding him toward truths that would reshape not only his understanding of the past, but his vision for the future of the monarchy itself. The weight of the key in his hand felt symbolic of the weight of responsibility that Diana had placed on his shoulders. She had trusted him with secrets that could potentially destabilize the very institution he was born to lead, but she had also given him the tools to transform that institution in ways that could make it more relevant and meaningful for future generations. As he prepared to leave Kensington Palace and make his way to the address Diana had provided, William understood that this birthday would mark not just another year of his life, but the beginning of a completely new chapter in his understanding of what it meant to be both a Windsor and a human being in the modern world. The London address Diana had written led William to a discreet building in Belgravia, one of those elegant Georgian structures that housed private banks and exclusive services for wealthy clients who valued discretion above all else. The nameplate beside the entrance simply read, Thornfield Private Vaults, giving no indication of the secrets stored within its walls. William had traveled alone, having dismissed his security detail with careful explanation about needing private time to handle personal family matters. The fewer people who knew about this discovery, the better, at least until he understood the full scope of what his mother had left for him. Inside the building, the atmosphere was hushed and formal. An elderly gentleman in an impeccable suit greeted William with the kind of respectful recognition that suggested he had been expecting this visit for many years. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Pemberton and led William through several corridors lined with heavy doors, each protecting the private archives of Britain's most influential families. Your mother made very specific arrangements, Mr. Pemberton explained as they walked. She visited here several times during the summer of 1997, each time adding to her collection. She was quite particular about the conditions under which these materials could be accessed. They stopped before vault number 247, and Mr. Pemberton produced an ornate ledger. According to our records, Princess Diana specified that this vault could only be opened by Prince William, and only after his 40th birthday. She seemed to believe that you would need time to mature and gain life experience before you could properly understand the significance of what she had preserved here. William inserted the key Diana had left him, and the heavy door swung open to reveal a small but well-organized space. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, and a small desk sat in the center with additional sealed envelopes arranged carefully across its surface. But what immediately caught William's attention was a large portrait of Diana herself, painted during the early years of her marriage, when her eyes still held hope and innocence. The first filing cabinet was labeled Royal Protocols and Hidden Decisions 1980 to 1997. As William opened it, he discovered hundreds of documents that Diana had somehow acquired during her years as a member of the royal family. These weren't the official records that historians and biographers had access to, but rather the private communications, internal memos, and confidential reports that revealed how decisions about the royal family were really made. Among the most shocking documents was a series of letters between palace officials and government ministers discussing Diana's suitability as a long-term member of the royal family. These letters, dating from as early as 1983, showed that concerns about Diana's independent nature and her popularity with the public had been raised almost immediately after William's birth. One memo, written by a senior palace advisor in 1984, stated, "The Princess of Wales' insistence on involving herself in her children's daily care and education presents challenges to traditional royal child-rearing protocols. Her emotional approach to parenting may prove detrimental to Prince William's preparation for his future role. Consider implementing gradual separation strategies." Another document revealed that there had been serious discussions about removing William from Diana's primary care as early as 1986, following her increasing involvement in charitable work that some royal advisors considered inappropriate for a future queen. The plan had been shelved only because of Diana's immense popularity with the British public and the potential scandal such a move might create. William felt physically sick as he read these documents. They revealed a calculated campaign to undermine his mother's influence over her own children, all in the name of preserving royal tradition. The cold, bureaucratic language used to describe intimate family relationships showed him a side of the royal establishment that he had never fully understood, despite growing up within it. The second filing cabinet contained what Diana had labeled the Camilla files. These documents painted a very different picture of the relationship between Charles and Camilla than what had been presented to the public. Rather than a tragic love story interrupted by duty, these papers suggested a much more calculated arrangement that had the quiet approval of certain royal family members from the very beginning. Correspondence between Charles and Camilla dating back to the 1970s showed that their relationship had never truly ended, even during Charles's courtship of Diana. More disturbing were documents suggesting that Diana's marriage had been seen by some as a temporary arrangement designed to produce heirs and provide the monarchy with a popular figurehead, while Charles maintained his real relationship in private. One particularly damning letter from a senior royal advisor to Charles, dated just months before his wedding to Diana, stated, "The arrangement with Miss Spencer serves multiple purposes: public approval, heir production, and the maintenance of discretion regarding your personal preferences. The young lady's naivety regarding court politics should ensure minimal complications during the transition period." William had to stop reading for several minutes after discovering this document. The clinical way his parents' marriage had been discussed, as if his mother were simply a temporary solution to a public relations problem, filled him with a rage he had rarely experienced. It also explained so many of the tensions and strange dynamics he had witnessed as a child, but had been too young to understand. The third cabinet was perhaps the most personal, containing Diana's own written accounts of her life within the royal family. These weren't the carefully crafted interviews she had given to journalists, but raw, unfiltered descriptions of her experiences, fears, and growing awareness of how she was being manipulated and controlled. In one particularly powerful entry, dated July 15, 1997, just weeks before her death, Diana wrote, "I finally understand that I was never meant to be a permanent part of this family. I was selected to provide William and Harry with royal blood and public sympathy, and then to gracefully disappear. But they underestimated my love for my sons and my determination to protect them from the same emotional manipulation that destroyed my marriage." Diana's journals also revealed the extent to which she had been monitored and controlled during her marriage. Phone calls were recorded, her mail was screened, and her movements were tracked not just for security purposes, but to ensure she didn't develop relationships or gather information that might threaten the royal family's carefully maintained image. She had discovered that even her charitable work, which had seemed like a form of freedom and personal expression, had been carefully managed to serve the monarchy's interests. Her involvement with landmine awareness, AIDS patients, and homeless shelters had been encouraged not because the royal family supported these causes, but because Diana's compassionate image helped modernize the monarchy's public perception without requiring any actual changes to royal policy or behavior. Perhaps most heartbreaking were Diana's accounts of how her mental health struggles had been used against her. Rather than receiving support and treatment for her depression and eating disorders, she had been made to feel that these issues proved her unsuitability for royal life. Palace doctors had been instructed to minimize her symptoms in their reports while maximizing concerns about her ability to fulfill her royal duties. In one journal entry from 1995, Diana wrote, "They want me to believe that I'm crazy, that my perceptions of what's happening around me are distorted by my illness. But I'm not crazy. I can see exactly what they're doing, and I'm documenting everything so that someday William will understand that his mother was not the unstable woman they tried to portray." The fourth cabinet contained what Diana called the future files, documents outlining plans for William's education and preparation for kingship that she had discovered and strongly opposed. These files revealed a systematic program designed to gradually distance William from his mother's influence, while surrounding him with advisors who would shape him according to traditional royal expectations. The plans included psychological evaluations to identify and correct any traits William might have inherited from his mother, particularly her tendency toward emotional expression and her desire to connect with ordinary people. There were detailed curricula for private tutoring that emphasized duty, hierarchy, and the importance of maintaining social distance from subjects. Most disturbing was a document outlining strategies for managing William's grief following Diana's anticipated removal from his life. The paper, written as if Diana's marginalization or death were inevitable, provided scripts for explaining her absence and techniques for redirecting William's emotional attachment toward more appropriate royal role models. William realized that his mother had risked everything to gather this evidence. The fact that she had been able to access such confidential documents suggested that she had developed her own network of informants within the royal household, people who had been disturbed by what they witnessed and had chosen to help her document the truth. As he explored the final sections of Diana's archive, William discovered audio recordings that his mother had made in secret. These recordings captured conversations between royal family members and their advisors, revealing the cold calculations behind decisions that affected millions of people's lives. One recording, made at a family gathering in 1996, captured a conversation between senior royals discussing how to handle Diana's increasing popularity and independence. The voices, which William recognized as belonging to relatives he had trusted and respected, spoke about his mother as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a human being deserving of respect and compassion. The recordings also captured Diana's own voice, speaking to trusted friends about her fears for her sons' futures and her determination to ensure they would grow up understanding the difference between royal duty and basic human decency. Her voice, so familiar yet strange after all these years, brought William to tears as he heard his mother's love and concern for him expressed in her own words. In one particularly moving recording, Diana spoke about her hopes for William's future. "I want him to be a king who serves his people, not one who expects to be served. I want him to understand that real power comes from connecting with others, from showing genuine care and compassion. The royal family wants to turn him into another Charles, but I believe William has the strength to be something better." As William made his way through the final documents in Diana's collection, he began to understand the full scope of what she had accomplished. This wasn't just a collection of evidence about royal family wrongdoing. It was a comprehensive guide to the hidden power structures and secret decision-making processes that really controlled the British monarchy. Diana had mapped out the networks of advisors, politicians, and courtiers who wielded real influence behind the scenes. She had documented the financial arrangements that kept certain aristocratic families loyal to the crown. She had even uncovered evidence of how public opinion was manipulated through carefully planted stories in sympathetic media outlets. The final envelope in the collection was addressed to William personally and marked "Open Last." Inside, he found Diana's most direct message about what she hoped he would do with this information. Her words were both a challenge and an expression of faith in his character. "My darling William, I know that what you have discovered here will be overwhelming and probably frightening. You might be tempted to bury these secrets again, to pretend you never found them. That would be the safe choice, the choice that would protect you and preserve your future as king. But I believe you are stronger and more compassionate than the men who came before you. I believe you can use this knowledge not to destroy the monarchy, but to transform it into something worthy of the people it claims to serve." As William prepared to leave the vault, he realized that Diana had given him much more than evidence of past wrongdoing. She had provided him with a roadmap for understanding how power really worked within the British establishment, and, more importantly, she had shown him that change was possible if someone had the courage to challenge the system from within. The weight of this responsibility felt enormous, but as William looked one last time at his mother's portrait, he also felt a sense of clarity that he had never experienced before. For the first time in his life, he truly understood not just what had happened to his mother, but what role he was meant to play in ensuring that her sacrifices had not been in vain. The revelation that would shake William to his core came in the final section of his mother's letter, written in her most urgent handwriting. Diana had discovered something in the days before her death that went beyond family politics and royal protocols. She had uncovered evidence suggesting that her growing independence and her collection of damaging information about the royal family had made her more than just an inconvenience. She had become what some considered a genuine threat to the stability of the monarchy. In the last pages of her letter, Diana wrote about a conversation she had accidentally overheard during a reception at Buckingham Palace in August 1997. She had entered a private study looking for a quiet place to make a phone call when she heard voices coming from an adjacent room. The door was slightly ajar, and the voices belonged to senior royal advisors and what Diana described as men in expensive suits who didn't seem to be part of the usual palace staff. The conversation that Diana transcribed in her letter was chilling in its implications. The men were discussing what they called the Diana problem and debating various solutions for dealing with her. Any heavy-handed approach would create a martyr situation that could be even more damaging. Diana wrote that she had been frozen with terror as she listened to these men discuss her as if she were a strategic problem to be solved rather than a human being. The conversation had continued for nearly 20 minutes, during which various approaches to managing the situation were discussed with cold, clinical detachment. What terrified Diana most was the realization that these weren't just palace advisors venting frustration. These were powerful men discussing concrete strategies for neutralizing what they saw as a threat to British institutions. The conversation included references to Diana's travel plans, her relationships, and her ongoing legal battles with the royal family. In her letter, Diana admitted that she had initially tried to convince herself that she had misunderstood what she heard, that surely these men were just engaging in hypothetical discussions about worst-case scenarios. But, over the following days, she began to notice changes in her environment that suggested the conversation had been very real. Her phone calls began experiencing strange interruptions and echoes that suggested monitoring equipment. Her mail delivery became irregular, with some letters arriving days late or not at all. Most disturbing, she began to recognize some of the security personnel around her as people who had been present at the palace reception, suggesting that her protection detail might not be entirely focused on protecting her. Diana's paranoia, which had been dismissed by the media and even some friends as a symptom of her mental health struggles, began to seem entirely rational as she documented incident after incident that suggested coordinated surveillance and manipulation of her daily life. The letter revealed that Diana had tried to share her concerns with trusted friends and even with Prince Charles, but she had been met with dismissive reassurances that she was imagining threats that didn't exist. The very people she turned to for help seemed to be following a script designed to isolate her and make her doubt her own perceptions. In her most desperate moments, Diana had reached out to investigative journalists and foreign media contacts, hoping to find someone who would take her concerns seriously and help her document what was happening. But these efforts had been systematically blocked or undermined, with sources suddenly becoming unavailable and planned interviews being canceled at the last minute. William read with growing horror as his mother described her final weeks, during which she had felt increasingly trapped and isolated despite being one of the most visible people in the world. Diana had realized that her fame, rather than protecting her, had made her a more challenging target that required more sophisticated methods of control. The letter revealed that Diana had begun making plans to leave England permanently, taking William and Harry with her to a country where they could live normal lives away from royal protocol and political intrigue. She had been in secret negotiations with several governments about asylum arrangements and had even identified potential schools and living situations for her sons. These escape plans explained some of Diana's behavior during her final months, including her relationships with Dodi Fayed and other wealthy international figures who had the resources and connections to help her establish a new life outside British jurisdiction. What the media had portrayed as romantic whirlwinds had actually been careful alliances with people who could provide protection and practical support for her exit strategy. Diana wrote that she had planned to reveal everything she had discovered about the royal family once she and her sons were safely beyond the reach of British authorities. She had intended to use her evidence not for revenge, but to force reforms that would prevent future generations of royals from experiencing the manipulation and control that had destroyed her marriage and threatened her children's well-being. The most chilling revelation in Diana's letter was her description of a phone call she had received just days before her death. The caller had been someone claiming to represent interested parties who wanted to arrange a meeting to discuss mutually beneficial solutions to recent complications. Diana had declined the meeting, but the caller had been persistent, suggesting that declining was not really an option and that Diana's children's futures might depend on her cooperation. The veiled threats had been delivered in polite, professional language, but Diana had understood exactly what was being communicated. In response to these threats, Diana had accelerated her preparations for leaving England. She had already moved most of her important documents and evidence to secure locations outside the country, and she had arranged for William and Harry to join her in France under the pretense of her extended vacation. Diana's letter revealed that the trip to Paris in August 1997 had not been a romantic getaway with Dodi Fayed, as portrayed in the media. It had been the first stage of an elaborate escape plan designed to get Diana and her sons away from British soil before the interested parties could take more direct action to stop her. The plan had been for William and Harry to join Diana in Paris after a few days, where they would then travel together to a predetermined safe location. Diana had chosen to travel with Dodi because his father's wealth and international connections provided resources that would be essential for establishing new lives away from royal control. What went wrong with this plan was something that Diana had anticipated but hoped to avoid. In her letter, she wrote, "I know they will try to stop me, and I know they have the power to do terrible things if they feel threatened enough. But I also know that if something happens to me, the truth will eventually come out, and my sons will understand that everything I did was to protect them and to try to make their lives better." Diana had arranged for multiple copies of her evidence to be held by trusted contacts around the world, with instructions for their release if anything happened to her. She had also prepared detailed letters for William and Harry explaining her actions and providing them with the tools they would need to protect themselves from the same forces that had ultimately destroyed her. The letter revealed that Diana had been receiving specific threats about what would happen to her sons if she continued with her plans to expose royal family secrets. These threats had been designed to exploit her deepest fears as a mother, suggesting that William and Harry might be removed from her custody permanently or that their futures as members of the royal family might be destroyed. But rather than backing down, Diana had decided that the only way to truly protect her children was to remove them from the system entirely. She believed that as long as they remained within the royal establishment, they would always be vulnerable to the same manipulation and control that she had experienced. Diana's final entries in the letter described her last conversations with William and Harry before leaving for Paris. She had tried to prepare them for the possibility that their lives were about to change dramatically, without revealing the full extent of the dangers she believed they were all facing. She had told them that she loved them more than anything in the world, and that everything she was doing was designed to give them the freedom to become the men they were meant to be, rather than the men that others wanted to shape them into. She had promised them that even if they were separated for a while, they would eventually understand why she had made the choices she did. The letter also revealed Diana's final instructions to William about how to use the evidence she had gathered. She urged him to be patient, to wait until he was in a position of real power within the royal family before revealing what he knew. She warned him that premature disclosure would likely result in the evidence being dismissed or covered up, and that he needed to build his own network of trustworthy allies before challenging the system. Diana had also provided William with contact information for the people around the world who held copies of her evidence, along with code words and verification procedures that would allow him to access additional materials when he was ready to take action. As William finished reading this section of his mother's letter, he realized that Diana's death had not been the tragic accident that the world believed it to be. At best, it had been the result of a campaign of psychological pressure and deliberate isolation that had forced her into increasingly desperate circumstances. At worst, it had been the direct result of actions taken by people who saw her as a threat to be eliminated. The weight of this knowledge was almost unbearable. William understood that he now possessed information that could potentially bring down the British monarchy, destroy his family, and plunge the country into constitutional crisis. But he also understood that his mother had died trying to protect him and Harry from the very forces that had killed her. Looking around the vault where Diana had hidden her secrets, William felt the full weight of the responsibility she had placed on his shoulders. She had trusted him not just with the truth about her death, but with the power to ensure that her sacrifices would lead to meaningful change rather than simply becoming another royal family tragedy buried by time and official silence. The decision about what to do with this information would determine not just William's own future, but the future of the monarchy itself. As he carefully gathered his mother's documents and prepared to leave the vault, William knew that his life had just been divided into two parts: everything that had happened before he learned the truth about his mother's death, and everything that would happen afterward. The days following William's discovery of Diana's evidence passed in a blur of carefully maintained normalcy. He attended scheduled royal events, participated in ceremonial duties, and maintained his public persona, all while grappling with the devastating knowledge that his mother's death had been far more complex and sinister than anyone had ever suspected. Catherine noticed the change in her husband immediately. After 22 years of marriage, she could read his moods and emotional states with remarkable accuracy. During breakfast on the morning after his visit to the vault, she observed that William seemed to be carrying a weight that threatened to crush him. "Something's happened," she said quietly as their children finished their meal and prepared to leave for their various activities. "Something significant." William wanted desperately to share his burden with the one person in the world he trusted completely, but Diana's letter had included specific warnings about the dangers of involving anyone else in the knowledge she had preserved. His mother had written that the forces responsible for her death were still active within the British establishment, and that anyone who learned the truth would automatically become a target. "I need some time to process something I've learned about my mother," William finally said, choosing his words carefully. "It's complicated family history that I need to understand fully before I can discuss it with anyone." Catherine recognized the pain in her husband's eyes and respected his need for privacy, but she also made it clear that she would be available whenever he was ready to share whatever he had discovered. This unconditional support, offered without questions or pressure, reminded William of his mother's own capacity for love without conditions. Over the following weeks, William began the painstaking process of verifying Diana's evidence. Using his position within the royal family and his connections throughout British society, he carefully investigated the claims his mother had made without revealing the source of his information. His first step was to locate some of the people Diana had mentioned in her notes as potential allies or sources of additional information. Many of these individuals had retired from their positions or had passed away in the years since Diana's death, but William was able to track down several former palace employees, government officials, and journalists who had witnessed or participated in the events Diana had described. These conversations, conducted with extreme discretion and often under the pretense of historical research for charitable projects, confirmed many of Diana's most serious allegations. William discovered that his mother's perception of being monitored and controlled had been entirely accurate, and that the threats she had received in her final weeks had been very real. One former palace security official, now in his 70s and living in quiet retirement, provided William with additional details about the surveillance operations that had been conducted against Diana during her final years. The man, who agreed to speak only after William provided him with proof of his identity and assured him of complete confidentiality, revealed that Diana's protection detail had included personnel whose primary loyalty was to palace administrators rather than to Diana's personal safety. "Your mother was right to be frightened," the former official told William during a clandestine meeting in a London park. There were people involved in her security arrangements who were reporting her activities, her conversations, her travel plans to parties who had no legitimate need for that information. When she began asking questions about these arrangements, the surveillance became more intensive rather than being scaled back. This official also confirmed that Diana's phone calls and mail had been systematically monitored, not for general security purposes but to track her contacts with journalists, foreign officials, and other individuals who might help her escape royal control. The monitoring had been sophisticated enough to intercept and redirect communications, which explained why some of Diana's attempts to reach out for help had been unsuccessful. Another crucial verification came from a retired journalist who had worked for one of Britain's major newspapers during the 1990s. This man revealed that there had been coordinated efforts to suppress certain stories about Diana's final months, including her preparations for permanently leaving England and her collection of evidence about royal family wrongdoing. "We knew she was planning something significant," the journalist told William during a private lunch at a small restaurant far from London. She had approached several international media outlets about major exclusive interviews and documentary projects. But every time we tried to follow up on these stories, we encountered obstacles that didn't feel like normal editorial or legal challenges. The journalist described how planned interviews with Diana had been canceled at the last minute due to security concerns, how documentary producers had suddenly lost funding for projects about her life, and how sources who had initially agreed to speak about royal family practices had become unavailable or had retracted their statements. This pattern of interference suggested a level of media manipulation that went far beyond normal royal family public relations efforts. It indicated that powerful interests had been working systematically to prevent Diana from sharing her story and her evidence with the public. William's most difficult verification meeting was with a former government official who had worked in national security during the 1990s. This man, who insisted on anonymity and met William only after elaborate security precautions, confirmed that Diana had been classified as a potential security risk during her final years due to her relationships with foreign nationals and her criticism of British foreign policy. "Your mother had become what we call a loose cannon," the official explained. Her charitable work was bringing her into contact with political figures from countries that were not always aligned with British interests. Her criticism of landmine policies and arms sales was creating diplomatic complications. There were legitimate concerns about her potential influence on British foreign policy. But the official also revealed that these security concerns had been used to justify surveillance and control measures that went far beyond what was necessary or legal. Diana's movements had been tracked, her communications had been monitored, and her personal relationships had been investigated in ways that violated her privacy and her rights as a British citizen. Most disturbing, the official confirmed that there had been discussions within government circles about contingency plans for dealing with Diana if her activities became too disruptive to British interests. While he insisted that no specific action had been authorized or taken, he admitted that such discussions had created an atmosphere where Diana's safety and well-being were not considered high priorities. As William accumulated this verification evidence, he began to understand that his mother's fears had been entirely rational and that her death, whether accidental or otherwise, had occurred in a context where powerful people had clear motives for wanting her silenced permanently. The psychological impact of these discoveries was enormous. William found himself questioning everything he had been told about his mother's final years, about the circumstances of her death, and about the nature of the institution he had been born to lead. The royal family that had raised him and shaped his understanding of duty and service had also been responsible for destroying the person he had loved most in the world. William also began to understand that he himself had been shaped by the same system that had killed his mother. The education he had received, the advisors who had guided him, the principles that had been instilled in him, all of it had been designed to ensure that he would become a compliant participant in the same power structures that Diana had died trying to expose. This realization forced William to re-examine his entire life and career. Had his military service been arranged to keep him away from royal politics during crucial years? Had his marriage to Catherine been encouraged because she represented a safe choice who would not challenge royal traditions? Had his charitable work been directed toward causes that would enhance the monarchy's image without threatening established interests? The paranoia that Diana had experienced during her final months began to affect William as well. He found himself wondering which of his staff members, advisors, and even friends might be reporting his activities to other parties. He became acutely aware of how his communications might be monitored and how his movements were tracked for security purposes. But rather than being paralyzed by this awareness, William began to use his understanding of surveillance and control to protect himself and to plan his next steps carefully. He learned to communicate through channels that were less likely to be monitored, to schedule meetings that would not attract attention, and to gather information without revealing his true purposes. William also began to build his own network of trustworthy allies, carefully identifying individuals within the royal household, the government, and the media who might be sympathetic to reform efforts or who had their own concerns about the concentration of power within British institutions. This network-building process was slow and dangerous, as William had to evaluate potential allies without revealing the full extent of what he knew or what he was planning. But gradually, he began to identify people who shared his mother's concerns about the need for greater transparency, accountability, and humanity within the British establishment. One of William's most important allies turned out to be someone Diana had specifically mentioned in her notes, a senior civil servant who had been disturbed by the treatment of Diana during her final years and who had been quietly documenting abuses of power within government and palace circles. This individual, whom William contacted through intermediaries and met under conditions of extreme secrecy, had maintained his own archive of evidence about corruption and misconduct within British institutions. He confirmed many of Diana's allegations and provided additional evidence about how decisions affecting the royal family were really made. "Your mother was a remarkable woman who understood the system better than most people realized," he told William during a carefully orchestrated meeting. "She saw how power really works in this country, and she was courageous enough to try to challenge it. Her death was a tragedy not just for your family, but for everyone who hoped that change was possible." This ally also provided William with crucial information about the current state of the power networks that Diana had identified. Many of the same individuals and institutions that had been involved in controlling Diana were still active and influential, which meant that William would face many of the same challenges his mother had encountered. But there had also been changes in the political and media landscape that created new opportunities for reform. The rise of social media, the declining deference toward traditional authorities, and the increasing public demand for transparency had weakened some of the control mechanisms that had been used against Diana. William began to develop a strategy for using Diana's evidence in a way that would honor her memory while also protecting his family and advancing the cause of reform. This strategy involved careful timing, strategic alliance building, and a gradual disclosure of information that would build public support for change while minimizing the risk of backlash. The first step in this strategy was to ensure the security of Diana's evidence by creating additional copies and storing them in multiple locations around the world. William used his international connections and his access to diplomatic channels to establish secure archives in several countries, ensuring that the information could not be suppressed or destroyed. William also began to prepare his brother Harry for the eventual revelation of what they had lost and what they might need to do together to ensure that their mother's sacrifices had meaning. This preparation required careful planning, as Harry was living in California and had already distanced himself from the royal family due to his own concerns about institutional racism and media manipulation. As William planned his next steps, he felt the weight of his mother's expectations and the magnitude of the changes that might be necessary to transform the monarchy into an institution worthy of public trust. The evidence Diana had left him provided not just an explanation of the past, but a roadmap for creating a different kind of future. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin in 1997 had finally learned the truth about why she had died and what she had hoped her sons would do to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Now the man who would someday be king had to decide whether he had the courage to honor that legacy, even if it meant challenging the very institution that had shaped his entire life. 6 months after discovering his mother's letter, William stood in the same study at Kensington Palace where this journey had begun. But now the room felt different, charged with the weight of decisions that would reshape not just his own life, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The evidence spread across Diana's desk told a story of corruption, manipulation, and tragedy that demanded action, but the consequences of that action were almost too enormous to contemplate. The final decision point had arrived sooner than William had expected. Intelligence sources within his network had informed him that certain parties within the royal establishment had become aware of his investigations. While they didn't yet know the full extent of what he had discovered, they were taking steps to limit his access to information and to surround him with advisors whose primary loyalty was to preserving the status quo rather than serving his interests. William realized that he was facing the same escalating pressure that his mother had experienced in her final months. The window for action was closing, and he would soon have to choose between accepting a role as a carefully controlled figurehead or taking the enormous risk of challenging the system from within. The conversation that forced this decision came during what appeared to be a routine meeting with senior royal advisors about upcoming ceremonial duties. But as the meeting progressed, William recognized the same pattern of manipulation that Diana had documented in her evidence. The advisors were not just briefing him about his schedule. They were systematically limiting his access to information, controlling his contacts with potential allies, and steering him toward decisions that would consolidate their own power. One advisor, whose family had served the royal household for generations, made a comment that sent chills down William's spine. "Your Royal Highness must understand that certain family traditions exist for very important reasons. Your mother, God rest her soul, sometimes failed to appreciate the wisdom of these arrangements, which led to unfortunate complications for everyone involved." The casual reference to Diana's unfortunate complications confirmed William's worst fears about the attitudes of the people who wielded real power within the royal establishment. They viewed his mother's death not as a tragedy, but as a problem that had been solved, and they were prepared to use similar methods to prevent him from following her path. That night, William made the decision that would change everything. He contacted Harry through secure channels that bypassed normal royal communications systems and arranged for an emergency meeting in California. The conversation with his brother would be crucial, as William knew he couldn't take on the royal establishment alone. The flight to Los Angeles gave William time to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of his life. He brought with him copies of the most compelling evidence from Diana's archive, along with a detailed explanation of what he had learned and what he believed they needed to do together. Harry's initial reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Despite his own conflicts with the royal family, he had never imagined that the circumstances surrounding their mother's death were anything other than a tragic accident. The evidence William presented forced him to confront the possibility that Diana had been killed by the very people who had claimed to protect and care for her. But as Harry absorbed the information, His shock transformed into a focused anger that William recognized as similar to Diana's own determination during her final months. The brothers spent 3 days reviewing the evidence, verifying details, and planning their response to what they had learned. Harry's perspective as someone who had already stepped away from royal life provided crucial insights into how they might use Diana's evidence effectively. He had maintained connections with international media outlets, human rights organizations, and political figures who might be willing to support reform efforts if presented with compelling evidence of institutional wrongdoing. Together, the brothers developed a comprehensive strategy for revealing Diana's discoveries in a way that would maximize the potential for meaningful change while protecting their own families from retaliation. This strategy involved coordinated releases of information through multiple channels, the establishment of an international foundation dedicated to transparency and accountability in government institutions, and the creation of legal protections for whistleblowers and reformers. The first phase of their plan was implemented on August 31, 2024, the 27th anniversary of Diana's death. William and Harry released a joint statement announcing the discovery of their mother's evidence and their intention to work together to address the issues she had identified. The statement was carefully crafted to avoid specific accusations while making it clear that significant revelations would be forthcoming. The immediate reaction was explosive. Media outlets around the world scrambled to understand the implications of the prince's announcement, while royal officials attempted damage control without knowing exactly what evidence might be revealed. The British government found itself in the awkward position of trying to respond to allegations that had not yet been fully disclosed. But William and Harry had learned from their mother's mistakes about the importance of controlling the timing and context of their revelations. Rather than releasing all of Diana's evidence at once, they began a carefully orchestrated campaign of disclosure that built public understanding and support while preventing their opponents from developing effective counterstrategies. The second phase involved the release of Diana's journals and personal accounts of her experiences within the royal family. These documents, presented without sensationalism but with appropriate context about their historical significance, provided the public with an intimate understanding of how power operated within British institutions. Diana's own words, describing her isolation, her fears for her children, and her determination to expose the truth, created a powerful emotional connection with readers around the world. The clinical, bureaucratic language of the official documents that Diana had collected provided stark contrast to her personal accounts, highlighting the dehumanizing effects of institutional power. The international response was immediate and overwhelming. Human rights organizations called for investigations into Diana's treatment and death. Foreign governments began questioning their relationships with British institutions. Media outlets that had previously been deferential to royal authority began asking more aggressive questions about accountability and transparency. The third phase of the prince's strategy involved the establishment of the Diana Foundation for Institutional Reform, an international organization dedicated to promoting transparency, accountability, and human rights within government and quasi-government institutions. The foundation, funded through careful financial arrangements that protected it from pressure by British authorities, provided a platform for ongoing reform efforts. Harry's experience with media manipulation and his perspective as someone living outside British jurisdiction proved crucial during this phase. He was able to coordinate international support for the foundation, while William worked to build alliances within British institutions among people who supported reform. The foundation's first major initiative was the establishment of an independent inquiry into Diana's death, conducted by international investigators with access to evidence that had never been fully examined during previous official investigations. This inquiry, while legally limited in its authority, provided a credible platform for examining the circumstances surrounding Diana's final months. The fourth phase involved William's direct challenge to the power structures within the royal family itself. Using his position as heir to the throne, William began implementing reforms within royal household operations, removing advisors who had been involved in the events Diana had documented and replacing them with individuals committed to greater transparency and accountability. This internal reform process was met with significant resistance from established interests, but William's access to Diana's evidence gave him leverage that previous reformers had lacked. He was able to document specific instances of misconduct and abuse of power, making it difficult for his opponents to dismiss his concerns or to retaliate without appearing to validate his allegations. The most dramatic moment in this internal struggle came when William presented senior royal family members with copies of the most damaging evidence from Diana's collection during a private family meeting. The confrontation, which lasted several hours, resulted in the resignation of several key advisors and the implementation of new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent future abuses. William's uncle, who had been present during some of the conversations Diana had overheard in 1997, finally acknowledged the truth about how Diana had been treated during her final years. This admission, while private, provided William with additional confirmation of his mother's accounts and created an ally within the royal family itself. The fifth and final phase of the prince's strategy involved the transformation of the monarchy itself into a more transparent, accountable, and democratic institution. This transformation, which would take years to complete, included new constitutional arrangements that limited the monarchy's political power while expanding its role in promoting human rights and social justice. William worked with parliamentary leaders, constitutional experts, and international advisors to develop a model for modern monarchy that would honor British traditions while addressing the legitimate concerns about democratic accountability that Diana's evidence had raised. This new model included regular parliamentary oversight of royal activities, public disclosure of royal financial arrangements, and legal protections for individuals who reported misconduct within royal institutions. The success of these reforms was measured not just in constitutional changes, but in their practical impact on people's lives. The Diana Foundation became a model for international efforts to promote government transparency and accountability. The reformed British monarchy became an example of how traditional institutions could evolve to serve democratic values while maintaining their cultural significance. But perhaps the most important measure of success was personal. William and Harry had honored their mother's memory not just by exposing the truth about her death, but by transforming the institution that had destroyed her into something she would have been proud to support. As William prepared for his eventual coronation as king, he knew that he would be ruling over a very different monarchy than the one his ancestors had inherited. The crown he would wear would symbolize not absolute power, but service to democratic principles and human rights. The institution he would lead would be accountable to the people rather than expecting their unquestioning deference. The final entry in Diana's letter had been a message of hope rather than anger. I believe that the monarchy can be something beautiful if it becomes an institution that serves love rather than fear, that promotes compassion rather than control, and that protects the vulnerable rather than the powerful. I believe that you, my darling William, have the strength and wisdom to make this transformation possible. Standing in his mother's study, surrounded by the evidence of her courage and sacrifice, William realized that Diana's greatest gift to him had not been the truth about the past, but the vision of a better future. The woman who had been destroyed by an institution dedicated to preserving power at any cost had left her son the tools he needed to transform that institution into something worthy of the values she had died defending. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin in 1997 had grown into a man who could ensure that her death would mark not the end of hope for reform, but the beginning of a new chapter in the story of British democracy. Diana's letter had given William the courage to choose transformation over tradition, accountability over authority, and love over fear. The monarchy that Diana had died trying to reform would finally become the institution she had envisioned, not through the gradual evolution that had failed her, but through the revolutionary courage of the son who had learned to see the world through his mother's eyes and to fight for the future she had dreamed of but never lived to see.